The clamor on Main Street in Telluride, Colorado fell to a hush as Sheriff Miller's voice boomed across the dusty thoroughfare. Zara Ross clutched the loaf of bread to her chest, her weathered fingers trembling as the lawman's accusing finger pointed directly at her face. The year was 1885, and in a mining boomtown where silver flowed like water for some while others starved, mercy was as rare as rainfall in August. "Thief!" bellowed Horace Finch, the rotund baker whose face had turned nearly as red as his brick oven. "I've caught her red-handed this time. 3 weeks she's been pilfering from my shop." Zara's heart hammered against her ribs. The thin cotton of her once fine dress hung loose on her frame, evidence of months of sacrificing her own meals to feed her children. 2 years a widow after her husband's mining accident, she'd exhausted every honest option available to a woman with 3 hungry mouths to feed. "It's just bread," she whispered, though no one seemed to hear as the crowd grew, hungry for the spectacle of public justice. Sheriff Miller adjusted his belt, his weathered face betraying little emotion. "Mrs. Ross, you know the law. Stealing, don't matter what it is." "My children haven't eaten in 2 days," Zara said, her voice stronger now, a mother's fierce protection overriding her fear. "What would you have me do?" The gathering crowd shifted uncomfortably. Some faces showed sympathy, others judgment, but none stepped forward to help. In Telluride, folks minded their own troubles, which were plentiful enough. "The law's the law, madam," the sheriff insisted, reaching for the bread. "Mr. Finch here is pressing charges." Just as his fingers brushed the coarse crust, a deep voice cut through the tension. "How much for the bread, Finch?" The crowd parted like the Red Sea, making way for a tall figure moving with the easy confidence of a man comfortable in his own skin. Preston York stood a full head taller than most men present, his broad shoulders tapering to a lean waist where a Colt revolver rested against his hip. Dust from the trail still clung to his denim trousers, and the worn leather of his boots told tales of countless miles ridden. "2 bits," Finch replied automatically, then quickly corrected himself. "But it ain't about the money, it's the principle." Preston's eyes never left Zara's face as he reached into his pocket and withdrew a silver dollar, flipping it toward the baker with practiced ease. "That should cover the bread and any other she's taken." His gaze shifted to the baker, hardening slightly. "She fed her children, Finch." Any man worth his salt would have done the same. The silence that followed was profound. Zara stared at the stranger, this cowboy who'd appeared from nowhere to defend her honor. His eyes were the startling blue of a mountain lake, set in a face browned by sun and weathered by wind. A thin scar traced his jawline, disappearing beneath several days' worth of stubble. "Well," Sheriff Miller cleared his throat, clearly relieved to avoid arresting a widow. "Seems the debt's been paid. I reckon we can consider this matter settled." The crowd began to disperse, grumbling with disappointment at being denied their entertainment. Finch snatched his coin from the dirt, shooting venomous looks at both Preston and Zara before stomping back to his bakery. "Thank you," Zara said, finally finding her voice, "but I can't repay you." Preston's face softened slightly. "Wasn't looking to be repaid, madam." "Then what were you looking for?" she asked, suspicion creeping into her tone. Experience had taught her that men rarely offered something for nothing. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Just passing through town. Couldn't stand by watching a woman get hauled to jail for feeding her young ones." He touched the brim of his hat. "Preston York, most folks call me Prees." "Zara Ross," she replied, clutching the bread tighter. "I should get home, my children." "Let me walk you," he offered, his eyes scanning the dispersing crowd. Some folks might not be as understanding as the sheriff. Zara hesitated. This man was a stranger, and handsome strangers in particular had proven dangerous in her experience. But something in his steady gaze suggested reliability, a quality in short supply in Telluride. "It's not far," she conceded. They walked in silence through the dusty streets, away from the commercial district, where the silver barons built their grand emporiums, and toward the more modest dwellings that housed the miners and their families. As they moved further from town center, the buildings grew shabbier, the streets narrower. "How many children?" Preston asked, breaking the silence. "3. Emma's 8, Jack's 6, and little Sarah's just turned 4. Pride momentarily outweighed exhaustion in her voice. Preston nodded. "Their father, gone. Mining accident 2 years back." Her words were clipped, rehearsed from countless tellings. "I'm sorry," he said simply. They rounded a corner onto a dirt lane lined with small cabins, most in various states of disrepair. Zara stopped before one of the smallest, its wooden slats weathered gray from mountain winters. "This is us," she said, suddenly self-conscious of the broken step and missing shutter. The door flew open before she could reach for it, and a small whirlwind with copper braids launched herself at Zara. "Mama, you were gone so long." Emma's thin arms wrapped around her mother's waist. 2 more children appeared in the doorway. Jack, solemn-eyed and watchful like his father had been, and little Sarah, thumb in mouth, golden curls framing a face too pale for a child her age. "I brought bread," Zara said, presenting her precious cargo, "and a friend helped me bring it home." 3 pairs of curious eyes turned toward Preston, who shifted uncomfortably under their scrutiny. "Are you a real cowboy?" Jack blurted out, eyeing Preston's gun and boots with undisguised admiration. Preston's face softened. "Reckon I am, son. Among other things, can you shoot outlaws?" The boy pressed, pantomiming a gun with his fingers. "Jack," Zara admonished, but Preston chuckled. "Only when absolutely necessary," he assured her, then looked back at Jack. "And I try real hard to make sure it's never necessary." Emma, practical even at 8, had already taken the bread inside. "Mama, there's no wood for the stove," she called. Zara's face fell. One problem solved, another waiting. The story of her life since Benjamin's death. Preston cleared his throat. "I noticed a fallen pine behind your place. Mind if I split some of that for you before I head on?" Zara started to refuse, pride warring with necessity, but Sarah's hollow cheeks and Emma's 2 adult worries decided for her. "That would be kind," she managed. "We can offer you supper at least. It won't be much, but—" "Be more than I'd have on the trail," he said easily, already removing his jacket. "Lead the way to that tree." For the next hour, the steady rhythm of axe against wood filled the air behind the small cabin. Jack appointed himself Preston's helper, solemnly carrying smaller pieces to the woodpile while Preston swung the axe with practiced efficiency. Inside, Zara sliced the bread and prepared a thin vegetable soup, stretching the meager ingredients as she'd learned to do. When Preston finally entered the cabin, shirt damp with honest sweat, he'd earned more than the simple meal Zara offered. He sat at their small table, dwarfing the rickety chair, and bowed his head respectfully as Zara said grace. The children peppered him with questions throughout the meal. Where was he from? Originally Kansas, but he'd ridden all over the Western Territories. Did he have a horse? Yes, a sturdy buckskin gelding named Copper, currently boarded at the livery. Had he ever shot a man? Here Preston glanced at Zara, before carefully saying there were some stories not fit for the supper table. As twilight deepened outside, Zara shooed the children to their pallets in the small side room. They went reluctantly, extracting a promise from Preston that he'd still be there in the morning to tell them more stories. Alone with Zara, Preston helped clear the few dishes. "You've raised fine children," he said, handing her a tin plate. polite, despite hard circumstances. "They're good children," Zara agreed, pride momentarily chasing away the exhaustion that seemed her constant companion. "Benjamin would be proud of how they've grown. Your husband?" "Yes." She turned away, busying herself with the wash basin. "We came here from Philadelphia after we married." Ben had dreams of striking it rich in the silver mines. A bitter smile touched her lips. "Instead, the mines took him and left us with nothing but debts." Preston leaned against the rough wooden counter. "No family to return to. My parents disowned me when I married Ben." "He was beneath my station," they said. She shook her head. "They were right about the hardship, but wrong about him. He was a good man. And you've been managing alone since." "I take in washing, mending, whatever work I can find that lets me keep the children close." Her hands stilled in the soapy water. It was enough until the new stamp mill opened. The noise drove away the game and prices in town doubled overnight. She looked up, meeting his eyes directly. "I'm not a thief, Mr. York, not by nature." "Preston," he corrected gently. "And I never thought you were." A comfortable silence settled between them as she finished the dishes and he built up the fire. The small cabin grew warm, almost cozy in the firelight. "I should go," he said finally, reaching for his hat. "Got a room at the boarding house in town." Something like disappointment flickered across Zara's face, but she nodded. "Thank you again for everything. The children will be sorry to miss saying goodbye." Preston settled his hat on his head, then hesitated at the door. "Actually, I'm planning to stay in Telluride a spell. Got some business to attend to." The words seemed to surprise him as much as her. "Perhaps I could stop by tomorrow, bring some supplies." "We don't need charity," Zara said quickly, her spine stiffening. "Not offering charity," he replied, his voice gentle but firm. "Offering friendship. And maybe some work if you're interested." "What kind of work?" Suspicion edged her tone. "Cooking, mainly. I've got some men coming in and they'll need feeding." He gestured vaguely toward town. "Business partners. I'm looking to invest in some property hereabouts." Zara studied him, trying to reconcile the trail-worn cowboy with this talk of business and investments. "You're not just passing through, then?" A slow smile spread across his face, transforming his weathered features. "Seems I might have reason to stay longer than planned." The next morning dawned clear and cold, the October air carrying the promise of winter. Zara rose before the children, rekindling the fire and heating water for washing. The bread was nearly gone, but Preston's woodpile would keep them warm for at least a week. Small blessings, she counted them carefully. She was combing Sarah's tangled curls when a knock came at the door. Emma opened it to find Preston standing there, his arms full of parcels. "Mr. York brought presents," she announced, ushering him in with the authority of a small duchess. Zara started to protest, but the genuine pleasure on Preston's face stopped her. He set his burdens on the table: a sack of flour, coffee, sugar, a small ham, potatoes, and several apples. More food than they'd had at once in months. "Before you object," he said, catching her expression, "consider it an advance. I spoke to Mrs. Barnett at the boarding house this morning. She needs kitchen help, and I told her you're the finest cook in 3 counties. "You don't know that," Zara said, hands on hips. "I know that soup last night was tasty despite having barely more than water and hope in it," he countered. "Mrs. Barnett pays fair wages, and she'll let you bring little Sarah along. The older ones can come after school." "School?" Jack wrinkled his nose. "We ain't been to school in months." Zara flushed with embarrassment. The children needed proper clothes, books. Preston nodded, understanding immediately. "Well, the mining company just donated funds for school supplies. No reason your young ones should miss out." By noon, a whirlwind of activity had transformed the Ross family's prospects. Preston escorted the older children to school, where the teacher, a kindly woman named Miss Abernathy, welcomed them without question about their absence. Zara, with Sarah perched on her hip, presented herself to Mrs. Barnett, who indeed needed help and seemed relieved to have found someone respectable for the position. "The miners who board here are decent enough," Mrs. Barnett confided, showing Zara around the kitchen. "But some of these new businessmen have manners that would shame a goat. You'll have to be firm." Zara spent the afternoon preparing dinner for 12 boarders, her hands remembering skills from before her marriage, when she'd helped in her parents' fine Philadelphia home. Sarah played contentedly in a corner of the kitchen, delighted by the simple gift of a wooden spoon and pot to bang. When Preston appeared at dinner time with Emma and Jack in tow, Mrs. Barnett raised an eyebrow but said nothing. The children sat quietly at a small table in the kitchen, enjoying the same hearty stew served to the paying guests. "Your Mr. York seems quite taken with you and your brood," Mrs. Barnett observed as they washed dishes later. "He's not my anything," Zara replied quickly. "Just a kind stranger." The older woman's knowing smile said she believed otherwise. For the next week, a pattern established itself. Zara worked at the boarding house from morning until evening. Preston often appeared at meal times, sometimes sitting with the paying guests, sometimes joining the children in the kitchen. He spoke little of his business in town, though Zara occasionally overheard fragments of conversations with men in suits who visited the boarding house. On Sunday, her day off, Preston arrived at their cabin with Copper saddled and a hired wagon beside him. "Thought you all might enjoy a picnic," he suggested. "There's a meadow up by the falls that's mighty pretty this time of year." The children clamored with excitement, and Zara found herself unable to refuse. They packed the lunch she'd prepared: fried chicken from yesterday's leftovers, biscuits and apple tarts, and set off, the children bouncing in the wagon while Preston drove. Zara rode beside him, acutely aware of his arm occasionally brushing hers as he handled the reins. The meadow was indeed beautiful, ringed with aspen trees whose leaves had turned golden in the autumn air. While the children explored, collecting colorful leaves and interesting stones, Preston and Zara spread a blanket in the sun. "You've been in Telluride before," Zara observed, watching him scan the surrounding mountains with familiar ease. "This isn't your first visit." Preston nodded, stretching his long legs before him. "Passed through a few times. Beautiful country." "And yet you never mentioned knowing the area when you first arrived." She kept her tone light, but the question was clear. He turned to face her, his expression serious. "Would you have trusted me if I'd seemed too familiar with your town?" "A stranger's help is easier to accept than help from someone who might have known your troubles and ignored them before." The insight startled her. "You're an unusual man, Preston York. Been called worse." His smile returned. "Truth is, I was here about 3 years back. Scouting investment opportunities for some Eastern partners. 3 years. Zara's voice trailed off as she calculated. "That was before the accident, before Benjamin died." Preston nodded. "I remember hearing about it. Cave-in at the Sheridan mine, wasn't it? 3 men lost." 4, she corrected softly. "They only recovered 3 bodies. Ben's was never found." Preston's hand covered hers briefly, a gesture of comfort that lasted just long enough to warm her skin. That must have made it harder not having closure. "In some ways," she agreed, watching the children chase each other through the golden leaves. "But it also let the children hope for a while. They'd imagine he'd just wandered off, lost his memory, and would come home one day." Her voice caught. "Jack still looks up sometimes when a man walks past our cabin." Before Preston could respond, Emma came running up, breathless with excitement. "Mama, Jack found a cave. Can we explore it, please?" Preston rose smoothly. "How about I check this cave first, make sure it's safe?" He followed Emma to where Jack stood proudly beside a dark opening in the rocks. After a careful inspection, Preston declared it just right for young explorers, but suggested they use a branch as a torch. The simple adventure delighted the children, and even Zara found herself caught up in their excitement as they discovered an old prospector's abandoned tools and a family of sleepy bats. As they packed to leave late that afternoon, Zara noticed Preston watching her with an unreadable expression. "What is it?" she asked, suddenly self-conscious. "You smiled today," he said simply. "First time I've seen it reach your eyes." The observation was so intimate, so perceptive that Zara felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I suppose I did," she admitted. "It's been a good day." "Could be more of them," he said quietly. "Good days, that is." The implication hung between them, fragile as frost. Before Zara could respond, Sarah tugged at her skirt, breaking the moment. That night, after the children were asleep, Zara sat alone by the fire, turning the day's events over in her mind. Preston York was becoming more than a kind stranger, more than a friend. The realization both thrilled and terrified her. She'd built careful walls around her heart since Benjamin's death, focusing solely on survival. The idea of letting someone new inside those walls seemed almost a betrayal. And yet, she found herself recalling the strength in Preston's hands as he helped her down from the wagon, the gentleness in his voice as he spoke to Sarah, the respect with which he treated Jack's boyish questions. Different from Benjamin in so many ways, and yet similar in the qualities that mattered most. The following week brought the first snowfall of the season, earlier than usual. The boarding house filled with miners seeking shelter from the sudden cold, keeping Zara busier than ever. Preston continued his mysterious business in town, occasionally bringing men in suits to dine at Mrs. Barnett's table. Zara noticed they treated him with deference, despite his frontier appearance. On Thursday evening, as Zara was finishing the dinner service, Horace Finch appeared in the boarding house dining room. Seeing Zara, he stopped short, his ruddy face darkening with recognition. "So this is where you've landed," he said loudly enough for others to hear. "From thief to serving girl." "Fitting, I suppose." Conversations around the room halted. Zara felt heat rush to her face but kept her composure, continuing to clear dishes from an empty table. "Nothing to say for yourself," Finch pressed, stepping closer. "No more excuses about hungry brats. That's enough, Finch." Preston's voice cut through the tension as he entered from the street, shaking snow from his hat. "The lady is working." "Lady?" Finch scoffed. "That's rich. Did she tell you she was practically begging on the streets before you came along, offering to clean houses for the mining executives?" His suggestive tone left little doubt about what he was implying. Preston moved so quickly that Zara barely registered it before he had Finch backed against the wall, one forearm pressed against the baker's throat. "You're going to apologize to Mrs. Ross," Preston said quietly, his calm voice somehow more frightening than if he'd shouted. "And then you're going to leave. Unless you'd prefer I inform Mrs. Finch about your weekly visits to Madame Lorraine's establishment." Finch's eyes widened in panic. "How did you?" "I make it my business to know things," Preston said evenly. "Especially about men who malign decent women." When released, Finch straightened his collar and muttered an apology toward Zara before scurrying out the door. The dining room remained silent for a moment before conversations cautiously resumed. Preston approached Zara, concern evident in his eyes. "Are you all right?" She nodded, though her hands trembled slightly as she stacked plates. "It's not the first time I've heard whispers." Widows are easy targets for gossip. What he implied was false. she interrupted firmly. But gossip doesn't need truth to spread. She glanced toward the kitchen where the children were helping Mrs. Barnett. I've done what was necessary to feed my children, Preston. I've cleaned houses, washed clothes, even shoveled coal at the hotel when they were desperate for help, but I've never. She couldn't bring herself to say it. I know, he said simply. I never thought otherwise. Later, after the children were settled in the boarding house's small back room, where Mrs. Barnett had offered them temporary lodging during the cold snap, Preston asked Zara to join him for coffee in the empty dining room. I need to tell you something, he said, his expression serious as he poured her a cup. About my business here in Telluride. Zara felt a flutter of apprehension. You're leaving? The thought distressed her more than she wanted to admit. No, he assured her. Quite the opposite. I'm settling here permanently. He took a deep breath. I've purchased the Sheridan mine. The cup froze halfway to Zara's lips. The mine where Benjamin died, Preston nodded gravely, and 3 others. But it's more than that. He leaned forward. Zara, the mine collapse wasn't an accident. I've spent 2 years gathering evidence. The previous owner, Victor Blackwood, knew the support timbers were rotting. He ignored safety reports to keep production going. Zara's hand shook so badly that coffee spilled onto the tablecloth. You're saying Benjamin and the others died because of negligence, because of greed? Yes. Preston's eyes held steady. And I'm going to make it right, starting with making that mine the safest in Colorado. How long have you known this? Her voice had gone cold. I suspected from the beginning. I've spent the last 2 years acquiring proof and the capital to buy the mine outright. He reached for her hand, but she pulled away. 2 years, she repeated, while my children and I nearly starved. Zara, please understand. I couldn't approach you without proof, without a plan. If Blackwood had suspected, I was investigating him, so finding me stealing bread, that was just coincidence. Disbelief colored her tone. Preston's expression softened. No. I'd been watching your family from a distance, making sure you were surviving while I built my case. When I saw what was happening that day, I couldn't stand by any longer. Zara stood abruptly. I need time to process this. Of course, he said, rising as well. But there's one more thing you should know. The new safety measures we're implementing at the mine. The first task is recovering the body in the collapsed eastern shaft. Benjamin deserves a proper burial. Tears sprang to Zara's eyes, the first she'd allowed herself in months. Without another word, she fled to her children, leaving Preston alone with cooling coffee and the weight of truth between them. The following days passed in a blur of snow and silence. Preston respected Zara's need for distance, though he made sure Mrs. Barnett knew that any supplies the Ross family needed were to be provided and charged to his account. Through the children, who still adored him unequivocally, Zara learned that Preston had moved into a small house near the mine and spent his days underground with the workers, implementing new safety protocols. A week after their confrontation, Emma returned from school bursting with news. Mr. York came to talk to our class today. He showed us maps of the mine and explained all about how silver gets formed in the rocks. Her eyes shone with excitement. And he said we could all tour the mine office on Saturday if our parents say it's all right. Did he now? Zara kept her tone neutral, though her heart quickened at the mention of his name. He asked specially about us coming, Jack added. Said he had something important to show us. Sarah, not to be left out, piped up. Mr. Prees said tell Mama he misses her biscuits. Despite herself, Zara smiled at the little girl's earnest delivery. Did he now? And her smile, Sarah added solemnly. By Saturday morning, curiosity and the children's pleading had worn down Zara's resistance. She dressed them warmly against the November chill and walked the half-mile to the Sheridan mine, where a new sign proclaimed York Silver Company in bold letters. The mine office was a sturdy building of hewn logs, with large windows allowing ample light inside. Several other families from town were already gathered when they arrived, the children exclaiming over a detailed model of the mine workings that dominated the center of the room. Preston stood talking to the schoolteacher, but his eyes found Zara immediately. He excused himself and crossed to her, removing his hat as he approached. "You came," he said simply, his relief evident. "The children wanted to," she replied, not quite meeting his gaze. "And you," she looked up then, struck by the vulnerability in his question. "I'm still processing everything, but I'm here." He nodded, accepting this tentative peace offering. "There's something I want to show you, after the tour if you're willing." The next hour was spent showing the townspeople the improvements to the mine, new ventilation systems, reinforced support structures, emergency evacuation routes. Preston spoke with obvious knowledge and passion, answering even the children's simplest questions with respect and care. Zara found herself impressed despite her lingering hurt and confusion. When the other families had departed, Preston approached Zara and her children again. "There's an additional office behind this one," he explained, leading them to a door at the back of the room. "I thought it might interest you." He opened the door to reveal a smaller room, comfortably furnished with a desk, several chairs, and bookshelves. A pot-bellied stove radiated welcome heat. But what caught Zara's attention was the wall behind the desk, where detailed drawings of mechanical devices were pinned. "Benjamin's designs," she whispered, recognizing her husband's precise draftsmanship. Preston nodded. "Found in his locker after the accident." Blackwood ignored them, innovations that would have made mining safer, more efficient. Jack approached the drawings, his small finger tracing the lines his father had made. "Papa was an inventor," he was, Preston confirmed. "A brilliant one." These designs for improved ore carts alone could transform mining operations throughout the West. Zara felt tears threatening again. "He always was sketching, tinkering. I never knew he'd developed his ideas so thoroughly." "They're patents pending now," Preston said quietly, "in Benjamin's name. The royalties will come to you and the children as his heirs." Zara sank into a chair, overwhelmed. "Why would you do this?" Preston knelt beside her chair, his eyes level with hers. "Because it's right. Because Benjamin Ross deserves recognition for his genius. And because—" He faltered, then pressed on. "Because I care about you, Zara, all of you." The children had wandered to the far side of the room, exclaiming over a smaller model of one of Benjamin's devices. "You orchestrated all this," Zara said, gesturing around them. "Buying the mine, recovering Benjamin's designs, arranging for patents." "I had the means and opportunity to right a wrong," Preston said simply. "What kind of man would I be if I didn't use them?" A thought occurred to Zara suddenly. "The eastern shaft. You mentioned recovering." "We started work yesterday," Preston confirmed gently. "It will take time, but we will find him, Zara. I promise you that." Later that afternoon, as they walked back toward town, the children ran ahead, playing in the patches of snow that lingered in shaded areas. Zara and Preston followed more slowly, a new understanding between them. "Your husband was clearly a remarkable man," Preston said. "The children are his legacy, but so are those designs. They'll help keep other men alive, other families whole." "Thank you for preserving that legacy," Zara replied. After a pause, she added, "Benjamin would have liked you, I think." The words were an offering, a permission of sorts, and Preston seemed to understand their significance. "I would have liked to know him." They walked in companionable silence for a while until Zara asked the question that had been nagging at her. You're wealthy, aren't you? Much more than you let on. Preston's crooked smile appeared. Depends on what you're comparing to. By Eastern standards, I'm comfortably situated. Made some good investments, had some luck. Yet you ride the trails like a cowhand, dress simply, do physical labor alongside your men. Money doesn't make a man, he said, his expression thoughtful. How he treats others, how he faces adversity, whether he stands by his word, that's the measure that matters. They reached the edge of town, where their paths would diverge. Preston to his house near the mine, Zara and the children to the boarding house. Will you have supper with us tomorrow? Zara asked impulsively. At our cabin. We've imposed on Mrs. Barnett's hospitality long enough. The smile that lit Preston's face was answer enough. Winter settled over Telluride with a vengeance that year, burying the town in snow by mid-December. Zara continued working at the boarding house, but with the royalty payments from Benjamin's first patented design beginning to arrive, she no longer lived in fear of hunger or cold. The children thrived, their clothes now warm and well-fitting, their education progressing steadily. Preston became a regular visitor at their small cabin, which now boasted new shutters, a repaired roof, and proper glass in all its windows. He never arrived empty-handed, though he'd learned to bring modest gifts: a book for Emma, wooden soldiers for Jack, a rag doll for Sarah, rather than the lavish offerings he'd first attempted, which had only embarrassed Zara. On Christmas Eve, he arrived with a small pine tree strapped to Copper's saddle and a crate of ornaments from Denver. The children fell upon these treasures with delight, transforming their humble cabin into a festive wonderland. While they decorated, Preston and Zara prepared a feast that would have been unimaginable just months before: roast goose, mashed potatoes, cranberry sauce, and apple pie. As they worked side by side in the small kitchen, Preston occasionally brushing against Zara as they moved between stove and table, a comfortable intimacy had developed between them. They spoke of everyday matters: the children's progress in school, improvements at the mine, town gossip relayed by Mrs. Barnett, but beneath the ordinary conversation ran a current of deeper feeling, as yet unacknowledged by either. After the children had been tucked into bed, their excited whispers about Santa Claus gradually fading into sleep, Preston and Zara sat before the fire, mugs of hot cider warming their hands. "I have something for you," Preston said, reaching into his coat pocket. "A Christmas gift." Zara began to protest that he'd already given them so much, but he shook his head. "This is different," he insisted, placing a small package wrapped in silver paper into her hand. Inside, she found a delicate silver locket on a fine chain. When opened, it revealed a tiny photograph of her 3 children, their faces captured in a rare moment of perfect happiness. "Preston," she breathed, touched beyond words. "It's beautiful, but how?" "The new photographer in Denver owed me a favor," he explained. "I sent him the drawing Emma made of the family, and he created this based on it." He hesitated. "There's space for another image on the other side, whatever you might want to add someday." The implication wasn't lost on Zara. She closed the locket carefully, then, to Preston's evident surprise, leaned forward and pressed a soft kiss to his cheek. "Thank you," she whispered. "Not just for this, but for everything these past months." His hand covered hers, warm and steady. "Zara." A knock at the door interrupted whatever he'd been about to say. They exchanged puzzled glances. Who would be calling on Christmas Eve, in this weather? Preston rose to answer, his hand instinctively checking the position of his gun before opening the door. On the threshold stood Sheriff Miller, snow covering his hat and shoulders. "Evening, York," the lawman said, stomping his boots to clear the snow. "Mrs. Ross, Sorry to intrude on your Christmas celebrations." "What is it, Sheriff?" Preston asked, ushering the man inside. Miller removed his hat, turning it nervously in his hands. "It's about the recovery operation at the Eastern Shaft." His eyes moved to Zara. "They found something, madam, or rather, someone." Zara's hand flew to her throat. "Benjamin," the sheriff nodded. "It appears so, but—" He hesitated, looking to Preston for help. "What is it, Miller?" Preston pressed. "Speak plainly." "The thing is," the sheriff continued reluctantly, "he's alive." The world seemed to tilt beneath Zara's feet. "Alive? After 2 years? That's impossible." "It's complicated, madam," Miller said. "He's at Doc Wilson's now. Unconscious, badly malnourished but breathing. The rescue team found him in a pocket of the mine that somehow maintained an air supply. There was water seeping from somewhere, and he apparently survived on cave mushrooms, rats." The sheriff grimaced at the unpleasant details. "But why didn't he try to get out?" Preston asked, his voice carefully controlled. 2 years is a long time." "His legs were crushed in the initial collapse," Miller explained. "He couldn't move. And from what Doc can tell, he's been in and out of consciousness, possibly delirious from infection and hunger." Zara felt the room spinning around her. Benjamin alive. Her husband, the father of her children whom she'd mourned and gradually begun to move beyond. Alive. She was vaguely aware of Preston guiding her to a chair, of his calm voice asking the sheriff more questions. How certain were they of the man's identity? What was his current condition? What were his chances of recovery? "Doc says it's touch and go," Miller was saying. "He's in bad shape, no denying it. But he's held on this long, which shows remarkable strength." "Indeed," Preston agreed, his expression unreadable. "Thank you for bringing this news, Sheriff. Please tell Dr. Wilson we'll come first thing in the morning. The children are asleep and this will require careful handling." After the sheriff departed, silence filled the cabin, broken only by the crackling of the fire. Zara sat motionless, the locket still clutched in her hand, her mind struggling to process the impossible news. "Zara," Preston finally said, kneeling before her chair. "What can I do?" She looked at him, really looked, and saw the conflict in his eyes, genuine concern for her alongside the undeniable knowledge that Benjamin's return changed everything between them. "I don't know," she admitted. "I can't think clearly. Benjamin is alive. My husband is alive." "Yes," Preston said simply, though the word clearly cost him. "The children," she whispered. "How do I tell them their father is back from the dead on Christmas morning?" With honesty, Preston suggested gently. "And with the understanding that this will be confusing and overwhelming for them, just as it is for you." "And for you," she added, reaching for his hand. "Preston, I don't know what this means for us, for whatever has been growing between us." He squeezed her fingers briefly before releasing them. "That's not important right now. What matters is Benjamin, his recovery, and helping your family through this extraordinary situation." He rose, reaching for his coat. "I should go. You need time to think, to prepare for tomorrow." "Please don't," she said quickly. "Don't leave. Not yet." The thought of facing this night alone, with her thoughts churning and her emotions in turmoil, was unbearable. "Just sit with me a while longer," he nodded, returning to the chair opposite hers. They sat in silence as the fire burned low, each lost in private thoughts, connected by shared concern yet separated by the ghost who had suddenly returned to flesh. Dawn brought no clarity, only the practical necessity of action. Zara woke the children early, gathering them around the small Christmas tree where presents lay yet unopened. "I have something important to tell you," she began, struggling to find words adequate to the task. "Something wonderful but also very confusing." Their faces grew solemn as she explained. in the simplest terms she could manage, that their father had been found alive in the mine, that he was very sick, but that they would see him that morning. That it was a kind of miracle, but also a situation that would require patience and understanding from all of them. Emma, practical as always, asked the most pressing questions. Would Papa remember them? Would he get better? Would he come home to their cabin? I don't know yet, sweetheart, Zara answered honestly. The doctor is taking good care of him and will know more soon. Jack remained silent, his expression troubled, while Sarah, too young to fully understand, simply asked if Papa would like the drawing she'd made for Christmas. Preston arrived as they were preparing to leave, his wagon ready to take them to town. He'd brought warm blankets and heated bricks for their feet, thinking of their comfort even in this most awkward of circumstances. The doctor's office was warm and smelled of antiseptic. Wilson, a competent man in his 50s who'd seen every manner of mining injury during his tenure in Telluride, met them in his front office. He's stabilized somewhat, the doctor reported. Fever's down, and he took a little broth earlier. Still drifts in and out of consciousness, but he's spoken a few words. Asked for you, Mrs. Ross, and the children, so it's definitely Benjamin, Zara asked, still harboring a sliver of doubt. Without question, Wilson confirmed. Despite his condition, I recognized him immediately. And he has that distinctive scar on his left forearm, from the mining accident in '79 that you mentioned in your identification after the collapse. Can we see him? Emma asked, her small voice steady though her hand clutched Zara's tightly. Briefly, the doctor agreed. He needs rest, but seeing you might help orient him. Just prepare yourselves. He looks quite different from how you remember him. Preston hung back as Wilson led Zara and the children to the back room. I'll wait here, he said quietly. This is a moment for family. Benjamin Ross lay on a narrow bed, his once robust frame withered to skin and bone. His dark hair had grown long and was streaked with gray, his beard wild and unkempt. But the eyes that opened at their entrance were undeniably the same deep brown that Sarah had inherited, though now sunken and shadowed with suffering. Zara. His voice was a rasp, barely audible. Is it really you? She moved to his bedside, taking his skeletal hand in hers. It's me, Ben. And the children, we're here. His gaze moved slowly to each child, tears forming as he recognized them. So big now, my Emma, my Jack, and little Sarah, not so little anymore. The children approached cautiously. Emma, ever the oldest, found her courage first and leaned forward to kiss his hollow cheek. Jack simply stared, overwhelmed by the transformation of the strong father he remembered into this frail figure. Sarah, after a moment's hesitation, presented the Christmas drawing she'd clutched all morning. For you, Papa, she said solemnly. It's our house and the mountain. Benjamin's attempt at a smile was heartbreaking. Beautiful, he whispered. Just beautiful. The visit lasted only a few minutes before Dr. Wilson gently suggested that Benjamin needed rest. As they prepared to leave, Benjamin caught Zara's hand. You're still wearing it, he murmured, his fingers brushing her wedding ring. Of course, she replied, though the simple gold band had lately been joined by Preston's silver locket around her neck, a juxtaposition that now seemed fraught with significance. In the outer office, Preston stood as they emerged. How is he? He asked, his concern genuine despite the complexity of the situation. Alive, Zara answered simply. Against all odds, alive. The weeks that followed tested Zara in ways the hardest years of widowhood had not. Benjamin's recovery was agonizingly slow, complicated by infections, and the severe muscle atrophy from years of immobility. Dr. Wilson was candid about his prognosis. Benjamin would likely never walk normally again, would require extensive care for months if not years, and might never regain his full mental faculties after such prolonged trauma. Preston, true to his word, ensured that Benjamin received the best medical care available, even bringing a specialist from Denver when complications arose. He maintained a respectful distance from Zara during this time, limiting their interactions to practical matters regarding Benjamin's care and the children's welfare. By February, Benjamin had improved enough to be moved from the doctor's office to a room at the boarding house, where Zara could care for him while continuing her work in the kitchen. The children adjusted to their father's return with varying degrees of ease, Emma taking on the role of helper with mature determination, Jack gradually warming to the man who bore little resemblance to the father of his memories, and Sarah accepting the situation with a child's adaptability. One evening, after the children had said goodnight to Benjamin and gone to their own room, he caught Zara's hand as she adjusted his blankets. "We need to talk," he said, his voice stronger now though still a shadow of its former vigor. "About York," Zara stilled. "What about him?" "He comes every day," Benjamin observed. "Brings things for the children, asks after my health, makes sure we want for nothing." His eyes, more lucid than they'd been since his rescue, held hers steadily. "And he looks at you the way I used to." Heat rose in Zara's cheeks. "Preston has been very kind to us, even before we knew you were alive. He's the one who bought the mine, who discovered your designs and patented them in your name." "I know all that," Benjamin said. "Wilson tells me everything while you're working. York is an honorable man." He paused, gathering strength. "Which is why I need to be honorable too." "What do you mean?" Zara asked, though a part of her already knew. "I'm never going to be the husband I was, Zara, the father our children remember." His fingers tightened weakly around hers. "You mourned me. You moved on, as you should have. And now I've returned, broken and dependent, disrupting the new life you were building." "Ben, don't let me finish," he insisted. "This past month, watching you care for me while managing everything else, I've seen how strong you've become, how capable. And I've seen how York looks at you with respect as much as affection." He took a labored breath. "I've also seen how you look at him when you think no one is watching." Tears sprang to Zara's eyes. "I haven't been unfaithful, Ben, not in deed or even in declared intention." "I know that," he assured her. "You're too honorable, but feelings aren't choices, Zara. They simply are." He managed a small smile. "Remember how my parents opposed our marriage, how your family disowned you, but we couldn't help loving each other despite all that." "That was different," she protested. "We were young, free to choose. And now you're not free because of obligations and vows made to a man who was, for all intents and purposes, dead." His gaze was unwavering. "I want to release you from those vows, Zara." She shook her head, tears flowing freely now. "I can't discuss this. You're still recovering, not thinking clearly." "On the contrary," he countered. "Nearly dying gives a man remarkable clarity." He shifted slightly, wincing with the effort. "I've had a lot of time to think, lying in that mine. About what matters, about love." He reached up to brush a tear from her cheek. "I will always love you and our children, but love sometimes means wanting someone's happiness more than your own comfort." "Ben, please, just promise me you'll think about it," he said, his strength clearly fading. "Talk to York. Be honest with yourself about what you feel, what you want." She could only nod, too overwhelmed for words. Later that night, unable to sleep, Zara slipped out of the boarding house and walked through the quiet, snow-covered streets of Telluride. Without conscious intention, her steps led her to Preston's small house near the mine. Light still glowed from his windows despite the late hour. Her knock was answered almost immediately, as though he'd been waiting, expecting her. "Zara," he said, surprise and concern mingling in his voice. "Is Benjamin all right? The children?" "They're fine," she assured him, suddenly uncertain why she had come. I needed to talk to someone, to you." He ushered her in, taking her coat, stirring the fire to life. They sat in his small parlor, a respectable distance between them on the settee. "Benjamin wants to release me from our marriage," she said finally, the words falling into the quiet room like stones. Preston's expression revealed nothing. "I see. And how do you feel about that?" Confused, guilty, relieved. She looked up at him, honesty compelling her forward. "I mourned him, Preston, I truly did. For months I could barely function, kept going only because the children needed me. And then gradually I accepted his death, built a life without him." "And now he's back," Preston said softly. "Yes, a miracle truly, but not the same man you married," he finished for her. "Is it terrible of me to think that way?" she asked, anguish in her voice. "To acknowledge that he's changed, that I've changed, that what we had might not be recoverable even if he were fully healthy." Preston considered his words carefully. "I think it's human and honest." He shifted slightly, turning to face her more directly. "Zara, I need to be equally honest with you. I care for you deeply. These past weeks, keeping my distance, watching you care for Benjamin with such dedication, it's only made me admire you more." "But," she prompted, hearing the reservation in his tone. "But I won't be the reason a family separates," he said firmly. "If there's any chance of rebuilding what you had with Benjamin, you should explore it fully. The children deserve that opportunity, and I can be patient." His restraint, his insistence on putting her family's welfare above his own desires, touched Zara deeply. It was so characteristic of the man he'd proven himself to be. "What if Benjamin is right?" she asked quietly. "What if the kindest choice for everyone is to acknowledge that what was can't be restored?" "Then that decision needs to come from both of you without my influence," Preston replied. "And it needs time. Real time, not just these few chaotic weeks." Zara nodded, recognizing the wisdom in his words. "Thank you for being the voice of reason and for—" she hesitated, "for still being here despite everything." "I'm not going anywhere," he promised. "Whatever happens between you and Benjamin, whatever you decide is best for your family, I'll respect it. And I'll remain your friend, if nothing else." She returned to the boarding house with a lighter heart, though no clearer path forward. Preston was right, such momentous decisions couldn't be rushed, especially with Benjamin still in the early stages of recovery. Spring came early to Telluride that year, the snow melting to reveal tender green shoots by late March. Benjamin continued to improve, regaining strength and clarity. Though Dr. Wilson's prediction proved accurate, he would never walk without assistance again. His legs too damaged by years of immobility and poor healing. Despite his physical limitations, Benjamin's mind recovered remarkably. He began working again, reviewing and refining his old designs, creating new ones. Preston arranged for a draftsman to visit regularly, translating Benjamin's rough sketches into proper technical drawings for patent applications. By April, it became clear that the small room at the boarding house was inadequate for Benjamin's needs. Without consulting Zara, Preston had carpenters modify the Ross cabin, widening doorways to accommodate a wheelchair, adding a ramp to the front entrance, and converting the main room to serve as both living area and workspace for Benjamin. When Preston showed Zara the renovations, she was overcome with emotion. "You did this for him, knowing what might develop between us," Preston finished gently. "Yes, because it's what he deserves, what you all deserve, regardless of the future." The Ross family moved back into their improved cabin in late April. Benjamin, settled in his wheelchair with his drafting table before him, found new purpose in his work. The children adjusted to the routine of having their father home, though he remained more mentor than active parent, his physical limitations preventing the roughhousing Jack craved or the exploratory walks Emma enjoyed. Preston continued to visit, though less frequently and always with transparent reasons, bringing new drafting supplies for Benjamin, books for the children, news about the mine operations. He and Benjamin developed an unexpected rapport, discussing engineering challenges and innovations with mutual respect and growing camaraderie. Watching them interact, Zara felt both gratitude and confusion. The two men in her life, so different yet similar in fundamental ways, seemed to have reached an understanding that she herself still struggled to find. In May, Benjamin's health took a sudden downturn. An infection developed in one of his poorly healed leg wounds, spreading rapidly despite Dr. Wilson's immediate intervention with the newest antiseptic treatments. Within days, Benjamin was delirious with fever, his weakened body struggling against an enemy it had insufficient resources to fight. Preston brought the specialist from Denver again, but the prognosis was grim. Too many years of malnutrition and injury had left Benjamin with little reserve. The children were kept away as his condition deteriorated, though Emma, wise beyond her years, understood what was happening. "He's leaving us again, isn't he?" she asked Zara one evening as they prepared supper, Preston sitting quietly with Benjamin in the next room. Zara pulled her daughter close. "I'm afraid he might be, sweetheart. His body is very tired from fighting so long." "At least we got to say goodbye this time," Emma said, her practical nature asserting itself even through her grief. "And he got to see how we've grown." On the 7th night of Benjamin's illness, with the mountain air sweet with spring blossoms, Zara sat beside his bed, holding his hand as Preston kept vigil on the other side. Benjamin had been unconscious for hours, his breathing increasingly labored. "Zara." His voice, suddenly clear, startled both of them. His eyes opened, fever-bright but lucid. "Preston." "We're here, Ben," Zara said, leaning closer. Benjamin's gaze moved between them. "Good, together, as it should be." His fingers tightened weakly around Zara's. "Remember our talk?" "About being free," she nodded, tears blurring her vision. "I meant it," he said. "Be happy, Zara, you deserve that. The children deserve a whole family." His eyes shifted to Preston. "Promise me you'll take care of them." "With everything I am," Preston vowed, his own voice rough with emotion. Benjamin seemed satisfied. "The designs, they're yours now, both of you, use them well." His eyes drifted shut, then opened again with visible effort. "Tell the children, tell them their papa loves them, always has, always will." Those were his last coherent words. Hours later, as dawn broke over the mountains, Benjamin Ross slipped away peacefully, Zara's hand still clasped in his. The funeral was held 2 days later, the entire town turning out to honor the man who had survived against impossible odds, only to be granted a brief reprieve before death claimed him permanently. The children stood solemn and tearful beside Zara, Preston a supportive presence just behind them, close but not presuming. In the days that followed, Zara moved through grief differently than she had 2 years before. This time there was closure, the chance to say goodbye. And there was Preston, respectfully keeping his distance while still ensuring they wanted for nothing, visiting the children who increasingly sought his steady presence as they processed their loss. A month after Benjamin's death, as summer bloomed across the mountain meadows, Preston arrived at the cabin with his usual Saturday gifts: a new book for Emma, fishing tackle for Jack, colored pencils for Sarah. After the children had exclaimed over their treasures and run outside to play, he and Zara sat on the porch, watching them in comfortable silence. "I've been thinking," Zara said finally. "About what Benjamin wanted for us. For me." Preston turned to her, his expression carefully neutral. "And what have you concluded? That he was right?" She met his gaze steadily. "About feelings not being choices. About love sometimes meaning putting someone else's happiness before your own comfort." She took a deep breath. "I loved Benjamin, a part of me always will. He gave me my children, supported my decision to leave my family behind, worked himself to exhaustion trying to provide for us." "He was a good man," Preston agreed quietly. "Yes, and in his final act of love, he tried to give me permission to find happiness again." Her hand moved to cover Preston's where it rested on the porch railing. "With you, if that's still what you want." Preston turned his hand to clasp hers, his eyes never leaving her face. "It is. It has been since that day on Main Street when you stood defiant, protecting your children against all odds." "We would need to wait," she cautioned. "A proper mourning period, for the children's sake and for propriety." "I told you before," he reminded her, "I can be patient." His thumb traced gentle circles on her palm. "And there are different kinds of relationships, Zara. I can be a friend to your children, a support to you without overstepping bounds until the time is right." "The children adore you already," she said with a small smile. "Especially Jack. You've given him the male attention he's craved." "They're remarkable children," Preston replied, "a testament to both their parents." They sat in companionable silence again, watching as Jack showed Sarah how to bait a hook for the tiny creek that ran behind the cabin, Emma supervising with big sister authority. "Benjamin's patents are being implemented in mines across Colorado," Preston said after a while. "The royalties will provide security for you and the children, regardless of other developments between us." Zara appreciated his sensitivity, his care to establish her independence even as they discussed a future together. "Thank you for ensuring that, for honoring his legacy." "It was the right thing to do," he said simply. "The man was brilliant. His designs will save countless lives." As the summer progressed, Preston became an increasingly regular presence at the Ross cabin. He taught Jack to fish and ride, discussed books with Emma, and patiently answered Sarah's endless questions about everything from why the sky was blue to how silver got made inside mountains. With Zara, he maintained a respectful distance in public, though private moments on the porch after the children were asleep allowed for deeper conversations, and eventually, the tender holding of hands, brief touches that promised more when the time was right. By Christmas, a year after Benjamin's miraculous rescue and subsequent return to their lives, Telluride had largely accepted Preston's place in the Ross family's life. Mrs. Barnett, ever the barometer of social acceptability, had pronounced that a year's mourning is entirely appropriate given the unusual circumstances, and that those children need a father figure after all. On Christmas Eve, exactly 1 year after Sheriff Miller's fateful knock had changed everything, Preston arrived at the cabin with the now traditional pine tree and ornaments. As they decorated together, the atmosphere was lighter than the previous year, the children's grief softened by time and by Preston's steady presence in their lives. After they'd gone to bed, full of excitement about Santa's impending visit, Preston and Zara sat before the fire much as they had a year earlier. This time, however, Preston took both her hands in his. "Zara," he began, his expression solemn, "this past year has confirmed what I began to suspect the moment I saw you on Main Street, that you are the strongest, most devoted, most admirable woman I've ever known." He released her hands to reach into his pocket. "I promised to be patient, and I've tried to be. But I find myself hoping that enough time has passed for me to ask you a question." The small box he withdrew contained a ring not ostentatious, but beautifully crafted, a modest diamond flanked by sapphires that matched his eyes. "Zara Ross, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Of allowing me to be a father to your children, a partner to you in whatever life brings?" Tears filled Zara's eyes, but unlike the tears of the previous Christmas, these were born of joy rather than confusion. "Yes," she said simply. "With all my heart, yes." The wedding took place on a perfect June day in 1887, with wildflowers carpeting the meadow where they'd picnicked nearly 2 years earlier. Emma served as Zara's maid of honor, beaming with pride in her new dress. Jack, serious in his role as ring-bearer, managed to make it down the aisle without losing the precious cargo. And Sarah scattered flower petals with abandon, charming everyone with her exuberance. Mrs. Barnett hosted the reception at the boarding house, where even Horace Finch made an appearance, his manner considerably more cordial now that Preston York was one of Telluride's leading citizens. Sheriff Miller offered a toast to new beginnings, and Dr. Wilson spoke movingly of resilience and second chances. As Preston and Zara danced beneath lanterns strung in the town square, he held her close, his voice soft in her ear. "Happy, Mrs. York, completely," she assured him, her head resting against his shoulder. "And grateful. For you, for the children, for this second chance at joy." "Benjamin would approve," Preston said with quiet certainty. "He wanted this for you." "For us," she corrected gently. "He saw in you what I've come to know, a man of integrity, of compassion, of strength." She looked up at him, love shining in her eyes. A man worth waiting for. In the years that followed, the York family thrived. Preston formally adopted Emma, Jack, and Sarah, though they continued to honor Benjamin's memory, visiting his grave regularly and proudly showing off the machinery his designs had inspired when they toured the mine. In 1888, Zara gave birth to a son, whom they named Benjamin Preston York, a bridge between past and present, honoring both men who had shaped their family. 2 years later, a daughter, Grace, completed their family circle. The Sheridan Mine, renamed the Ross York Silver Company, became known throughout the West for its safety innovations and fair treatment of workers. Preston expanded their holdings to include several smaller mines, implementing Benjamin's designs in each and establishing a foundation to support miners' widows and orphans. Zara, no longer forced to take in washing or serve meals to survive, found new purpose in managing the foundation, ensuring that no widow in Telluride ever faced the desperate choices she once had. On a summer evening in 1895, a decade after that fateful day when a hungry widow stole bread to feed her children and a passing cowboy paid her debt, Preston and Zara sat on their porch, watching their 5 children play in the twilight. Their home, a comfortable house built on the site of Zara's original cabin, overlooked the town that had witnessed both their greatest sorrows and their deepest joys. "You ever think about how it all began?" Preston asked, his arm comfortably around his wife's shoulders. "That day on Main Street." "Often," Zara admitted. "How close I came to being arrested, how differently everything might have turned out if you hadn't been passing by." "I've never told you," Preston said, his voice thoughtful, "but I wasn't just passing by. I'd been watching you for days, working up the courage to introduce myself properly." He chuckled. "Finch actually did me a favor with his accusations, gave me an excuse to speak to the most beautiful woman in Telluride." Zara laughed, leaning into his embrace. "And I thought it was my dignity and maternal devotion that attracted you." "Those too," he assured her, dropping a kiss on her temple. "But mostly it was the way you stood up to everyone, refusing to be shamed for doing what was necessary to protect your children." His arm tightened around her. "I knew then that you were a woman worth building a life with. And have I proven worthy of that assessment?" she teased. "Beyond all expectation," he replied seriously. "You've made me happier than I ever thought possible, Zara, given me a family, a purpose, a home." She turned in his arms to kiss him properly. "And you, Preston York, gave me back my future when I thought it was lost forever. First as a friend, then as a partner, and always as the most honorable man I've ever known." From the yard, their children's laughter rose in the gathering dusk, a joyful counterpoint to the peaceful contentment that had become the hallmark of their shared life. A life built not on dramatic passion or whirlwind romance, but on deeper foundations: respect, understanding, mutual support, and a love that had grown stronger with each challenge overcome together. What had begun with an act of desperate theft and unexpected kindness had blossomed into something neither could have imagined that day on Main Street: a family forged through hardship, strengthened by loss, and ultimately completed by the joining of two hearts that recognized in each other not just the possibility of love, but the promise of home.